Hi, and welcome to Ivy English. I'm Angela.
And I'm Wesley.
Today is October 8th. We're on page 23 of the magazine, and today's article is called Dr. Semmelweis and the History of Handwashing.
我们的中文标题是洗手这件事情背后的百年历史啊，洗手背后的百年历史，这是我们中文标题。那英文标题呢，其实我们今天要谈的是一个其实蛮有贡献的一个人啊，还有他跟我们洗手历史的关系。
The interesting thing about this, about hand washing in general, is that it's also a history of groupthink. Groupthink is where people all in a group believe the same thing because everyone else in the group believes the same thing. And getting that group to change their mind requires a certain proportion of the group to be convinced otherwise. I think the number is like 17% people have begun to research this. I'm not sure if that's true, but a certain proportion has to change their minds, and then everyone's like, well, of course the other thing is true.
Yeah, 所以关于洗手或者关于很多事情，其实我们这里可以学一个名词，好的 group think 啊，就是群体的思考方式啊。所以当一个大家都这样想的时候，你要去改变是很难的啊。那要有足够的人在这团体里面开始觉得说，好像应该是这样哦，这个时候改变才有可能。Yeah.
Actually, if you've been paying attention to U.S. news, there's a change in groupthink going on. Because when the coronavirus started, Americans were like, masks, no, not going to wear them. And you can watch the understanding seep in that masks are not about personal protection. They're about group protection. By wearing a mask individually, you're only protecting yourself about 5%. But by everybody wearing a mask, you get up to like 90% protection. So that's an interesting example of also groupthink in process of changing.
像 groupthink 这个东西的现象，其实各位可以看到，这次像这个新冠肺炎呢，在美国一开始大家都觉得戴口罩没有用了，他们医生也出来说口罩没有什么用了。可是后来大家慢慢改变了，越来越多的人发现到说，口罩也许不见得能真正保护你自己，可是它可以保护你周围的人。所以如果大家通通戴口罩的话，那安全性就会很高啊。所以慢慢大家美国人就开始戴口罩，因为他们知道，这其实很重要。
Unfortunately, it hasn't penetrated more than maybe 30% of the population yet. But there is hope, I hope, for the future.
所以现在美国人呢，有人开始戴口罩，但是很多人还没有接受这个新的想法啊，这本来就是这样。所以这个 Angela 老师说，希望他的同胞大家赶快学会戴口罩很重要这件事情。
Yeah. Okay, so let's read our article.In recent months, the coronavirus pandemic has sent the world into a state of confusion. Opinions on how to deal with this deadly new virus are as numerous as the stars in the sky. However, there's at least one thing that most people seem to agree on, that washing one's hands is an effective way of staying safe and healthy. Most people would be surprised to learn that the idea of hand washing was once fairly controversial.At one time, new mothers used to die of a disease known as childbed fever shortly after giving birth. In the 1840s, Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian doctor working at the Vienna General Hospital, became interested in this problem and began looking for a solution. After realizing that doctors and medical students had been handling dead bodies before delivering babies, Semmelweis put into practice a mandatory hand-washing procedure for all doctors, nurses, and medical students. Though Dr. Semmelweis's procedure greatly reduced the number of deaths by childbed fever, other doctors rejected his theory, and even his own hospital eventually abandoned the practice.Semmelweis, however, still firmly believed in hand-washing and published a book on the subject, but his ideas were never fully accepted. Sadly, his health began to worsen in the 1860s, and Semmelweis died in a mental institution before he could see his idea recognized. Around the 1870s, Scottish surgeons, under the guidance of Dr. Joseph Lister, began the practice of sanitizing their hands and surgical instruments before surgery. Not long after, many in the medical community began to recognize the earlier work of Semmelweis. More than a century after Semmelweis's ideas were rejected, The Medical University of Budapest changed its name to Semmelweis University in honor of his commitment to improving healthcare by way of cleanliness.
我们要让 Angel 老师喘口气哈，因为 Angel 老师他刚刚在录音前，他跟我讲，他读这文章，他心里面其实很多感触。他最近才看到一本书，讲到这个整个医疗历史上面对于女性的一些不公平的地方，那里面也有提到这件事情。那位作者就表示，当时虽然说这个塞麦维尔斯医师发现说，洗手可以大量减低这些妇女的产后的这个因为产褥热而死亡的人数但是大部分的医生不愿意洗手，因为他们觉得就是个女人而已嘛所以他们觉得说这个其实是对女性相当大的歧视。他们不觉得说我应该要洗个手再去帮她接生，他们觉得你就是个女人嘛，那接生走死了就死了这样的感觉那事实上在整个医疗体系里面还有很多其他这种女性不公的地方所以刚刚 Angel 老师读这个文章的时候，他其实情绪很激动，因为我们这个文章这样看起来好像只是个历史，但是事实上各位可以想象到在当时明明跟你讲你洗个手就好，这些妇女就不会死了，有的人就会觉得说 I couldn't be bothered你这干嘛还洗手干嘛，就反正看他的命嘛，他接生下来他活了就活了，如果得了这个产褥热，那走了就走了嘛所以真的是让人觉得这当年对待女性真的是非常不公平。那现在当然还有很多地方我们应该要尽量替女性去争取权益的，还要改变一些对于妇女这个性别的想法，尤其是身为男性我们真的觉得，我一直觉得女生是非常非常 fascinating 的所以我很尊敬他们，也觉得说他们是应该跟我们平起平坐，他们只是跟我们他们只是不一样而已。事实上我觉得女生比男生好玩。
I don't know.
I'm sorry.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, for you,
it's another
yes,
form
maybe.
of male chauvinism, probably.
I guess. I don't know. The point is, though, I feel that men and women, they're equal, but they're still different. There are differences in how men and women think and how women think, and it's due to our history. And I really appreciate that you said what you just said.
And that's fascinating.
Yes.
The way we're different.
Viva la différence. I can't say it very well. That's what the French say when they're talking about that. There is a difference between men and women. But we can't use that difference to make one or the other inferior.
That's true.
And that's the main point. Just because there's a difference doesn't mean that there's therefore a greater and a lesser.
男生女生真的是有些地方不一样但是男女有别并不表示说男生就比女生好，或者女生就比男生好或者你应该这个就并不表示说因为不一样你就应该对男生比较好，或者是对女生比较好，而是大家是应该是平等的。
Exactly. If you're interested in the book that I was reading, it's called Invisible Women, Exposing Data, and it's by Carolyn Criado Perez. And what she basically shows is that there's a lack of data about women and women's needs. And so this affects people designing things for society, and it affects basically, if you're not a woman, you don't know these things. Even if you are a woman, there's a bunch of stuff I didn't know how thoroughly women are ignored in data, and therefore it affects everything from car design to medical drugs that don't work on women to medical procedures that are dangerous for women, and so on and so forth. So this book is hard to read, but hard to read emotionally. Easy to read, actually. The English is easy, but the
对，这个我觉得这本书感觉起来非常有意义很值得读，因为他谈到因为其实我们现在都在讲大数据嘛，因为有了大数据，这个厂商他们就比较知道怎么样去服务人，或者是很多政策的拟定，有了大数据就比较能够符合需要。但是其实对于女性来讲，女性有很多方面其实是缺乏数据的，所以很多人对于女性不够了解，所以没有办法这个替女性做更多的服务所以这本书很值得一看。
Okay, so back to our article about hand washing. But it's the same thing.
Yeah.
So in recent months, as you all know, the coronavirus pandemic, dun, dun, dun. Every time I read those words, I just think, wow, world-changing event.
Yeah.
Has sent the world into a state of confusion. At the very minimum, it has sent us into a state of confusion.
Yeah. In recent months, 就是近几个月来那这个新冠病毒呢，它带这样的一个 pandemic 一个大流行has sent the world 这个 sent 在这里的意思就是使某个东西处于某个状态cause to be in a specified state所以这地方 send the world into 把这个世界让它处于什么状态呢？把它变成一个 a state of confusion 一个混乱的状态。
Opinions on how to deal with this, how to take care of this deadly new virus, are as numerous in the stars as the stars in the sky, meaning our author feels like there's way too many opinions on this.
Yeah, would you say this is very common? As numerous as the stars in the sky in English?
Yeah, you can say it if you want to really emphasize, if you want to overemphasize.
Yeah, because there's a equivalent Chinese expression.
Well, really?
Yeah, 多如繁星. Yeah,
so humans think alike. We're like, there's a lot of stars?
Yeah.
Uncountable?
Yeah.
That means there's a lot of things.
Yeah, 好，所以这个跟中文的多如繁星很像某个东西 is 或者 are as numerous as the stars in the sky 一定是 are 啦，因为是复数所以opinions 就是意见on 对于什么的意见，所以针对什么的意见呢？针对 how to deal with this deadly new virus 如何处理这个会致死的 deadly 会让你死亡的这样的新的病毒如何处理在这方面的意见呢是多如繁星。
However, there's at least one thing that most people seem to agree on, and that is that washing one's hands is an effective way of staying safe and healthy. For almost any disease, washing one's hands is an effective way of staying safe and healthy.
Yeah, agree on 这个 you agree to do something, but you agree on something 所以介系词 on， 所以这个地方我们看到说，他说 there's at least one thing， 至少有一件事情 that most people seem to agree on 这个 on 不要掉了，因为本来是 agree on one thing 所以大多数的人至少有一件事情。前面讲到说怎么处理这个怎么对付这个新病毒，意见很多，但有一件事情大多数人似乎都同意的，就是 washing one's hands 洗手 is an effective way of 是一个做什么东西很有效的方法呢 is an effective way of staying healthy, safe and healthy 保持安全保持健康一个很有效的方法，就是洗手是保持安全跟健康很有效的一个方法。
Now, most people would be surprised to learn that the idea of hand washing was once fairly controversial. If something's controversial, it means that people argue about whether or not it's true or whether or not it should be done.
就是有争议的意思controversial 那个 verse 就是 turn 就是转contra 就是 against 所以彼此转来转去那就是而且是 against each other 那就是表示有争议。好，我们看到这个，他说大多数的人呢 would be surprised to， 这是一个虚拟语气，就是假设那么一个状况假设一个情境，他们大概就会觉得很意外的知道 to learn that learn 在这里其实就知道的意思大多数人大概很意外会发现说原来 the idea of hand washing 这个洗手这个概念呢曾经有一度是 fairly 就相当的有争议性。
Now, at one time, new mothers used to die of a disease known as childbed fever. This disease was called childbed fever, and it was shortly after giving birth.
好，所以呢 at one time 就是过去有一段时间new mothers 就是新的妈妈，也就是刚刚生完小孩的妈妈呢 used to 很容易曾经怎么样的 die of a disease 就是死于某个疾病。那这个疾病怎么样呢？是 known as 这疾病被称为childbed fever 就是产褥热。
Now, in the 1840s, which is a century and a half ago, Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian doctor working at the Vienna General Hospital, this dude became interested in this problem. He's like, wow, all these women are dying. We're a hospital. We're supposed to be saving people. What's going on? And so he began to try to find a solution, try to figure out the problem.
好，所以我们上一集讲到说这个叫产褥热，那当然产褥热是它一定是 shortly after giving birth， 一定是生产之后不久就会有产褥就发生的一个病。所以在1840年代的时候呢，一位这个匈牙利的医生那他怎么样呢？他 working at 他在哪里工作呢？在这维也纳总医院那这位医生的名字呢叫伊格纳兹塞麦尔维斯那他呢这样的一个医生，他 became interested in 就对什么产生兴趣？对 this problem 对这个问题产生了兴趣，然后他开始 looking for a solution 他开始去找一个解决方案
After realizing that doctors and medical students had been handling dead bodies or corpses before delivering babies, Semmelweis put into practice a mandatory hand-washing procedure for all doctors, nurses, and medical students. So he's like, dude, y'all are handling dead bodies, and then you're going to deal with people who have just given birth and babies. Like, I'm sorry, but people at this time already knew that dead bodies got what they called at the time corrupted, that they would rot. I can't imagine that people didn't know that handling rotting bodies and then touching people who were just giving birth. I mean, to me, it seems so common sense that I cannot imagine making this mistake. However, they did. And so he saw, wait, this is a problem. And he put into practice, he made people understand that they must, he basically made a rule, wash your hands before you do anything else.
好，所以我们看这个句，他说 after realizing that， 他在了解到说医生还有这个医学院的学生，他们有 had been 在什么之前就在那里，在这个 had been 是过去完成，所以在他们这个 delivering babies， 在他们接生之前，他们有 handling 有去处理这些 dead bodies 死尸啊。那因为他了解到这个之间的关联，那当时的人其实已经知道死尸啊，它是会腐败的，这个对人体是不好的，但他们就是没有想到要去洗手啊。那但是呢，这位医生注意到，所以他注意到这个现象之后，你们都处理了死尸才去接生，那当然有问题啊，所以他就 put into practice， 他实行了一个 mandatory， 就是 compulsory， 就是这个强制性的一个 hand washing procedure， 一个洗手的程序，就是他告诉你你要怎么样洗手，或者你一定要去经过洗手这道程序啊。那给谁要求谁一定要做呢？所有的医生、护士还有医学院的学生。
And though his procedure, this rule, greatly reduced the number of deaths, he saved a whole bunch of women from childbed fever. Other doctors rejected his theory. If you read other history about this, they really go off on him. They're just like, this busybody guy getting up into our business. They get really angry about it. And even his own hospital eventually abandoned the practice. So the haters took over, and he was really hated and reviled for this rule.
好，所以他虽然说他所建议的这个程序呢 ，greatly 就是 very much， 大大的降低了 the number of deaths， 就是死亡的数字啊。那因为 by 在这里是 caused by 的意思，因为产褥热而死亡的数字大大的降低了。尽管如此啊，其他的医生 rejected 拒绝接受啊他的 theory， 而且甚至他自己的医院呢 eventually 到最后大概都受不了压力哈，只好怎么样 abandoned the practice， 都放弃了这个做法啊，连他自己的医院都不挺他了。
I think the issue was that they didn't want to believe that they were dirty. How could I be dirty? I'm not dirty. I don't need to wash my hands.
Yeah， 这里面有一个很重要，大概就是这些医生不觉得说，我怎么会是带菌者？我怎么会脏呢？我的手怎么会脏呢？Yeah,
I think that's the root of it, which is why they were so upset.
Yeah.
So, however, this dude, Semmelweis, still firmly believed in hand washing and published a book on the subject, because that's what you do when you got a new idea. But his ideas were never fully accepted in his lifetime.
但是呢，这位医生他仍然 still firmly believed， 这个片语大家可以学起来，因为这常常会这是一个很常见的 collocation， firmly believe in something。那如果是 believe， 你要对于什么事情你有很深的这个信念的话，你用 in 这个介系词，firmly believed in， 所以他仍然非常的相信洗手这件事情，而且他 published， 他出版了一本书 on the subject， 就关于这个主题，他出版了一本书，这个书的主题就是洗手这件事情，但是他的 ideas were never fully accepted， 但他的想法一直没有被完全的接受。这个 never 在这里可以翻成始终没有，他的想法始终没有被完全的接受。
Sadly, his health began to worsen in the 1860s, 20 years after his initial attempt to change the world, and Semmelweis died in a mental institution before he could see his ideas recognized.
好，很不幸的，他的健康慢慢的越来越糟糕，恶化，worsen 就是恶化，然后呢就是在1860年代他的健康恶化，那最后他是死在哪里呢？这让人很唏嘘，他是死在一个 mental institution 啊，那在这里其实就是精神病院的意思。institution 就是一个机构啊，那 mental institution 其实就是精神治疗的地方啊，精神病院啊。像我们讲 a language institution 就是一个这个语言学校啊，当然他是死在精神病院，所以大家觉得他疯了，干嘛这么坚持洗手呢？好，可能是这样子。好，那在他能够看到他的 idea 被 recognize 被认可被承认之前，他就过世了。
Now, around the 1870s, Scottish surgeons, under the guidance of Dr. Joseph Lister, you may recognize this name from Listerine, which was a cleaning product named after him, actually. So this Dr. Lister began the practice of sanitizing their hands and surgical instruments before surgery. Probably he got his hands on Semmelweis's books and was like, oh, dude, yeah.
所以大概在1870年代呢，有一个苏格兰的这个外科医生啊，这个 surgeon 就是外科医生啊，不止，他不是一个，是一些苏格兰的外科医师，这是复数的哈。Under the guidance of 是在谁的指导下呢？在这个 Dr. Joseph Lister 的指导下。那这个 Dr. Joseph Lister 后来有一个很有名的漱口水啊的品牌名字就是来自于他啊。那他开始 the practice of 他开始的这个做法，什么做法呢？ Sanitizing 就是使它清洁使它卫生的意思啊，就 make hygienic， 所以开始的清洁他们的手还有他们的这个 surgical instruments 他们的手术工具的这样的一个 practice 一个做法。而这什么时候做呢？ Before surgery 在外科手术之前，他们开始了要清洁他们的手部还有清洁的手术用具。
Not long after, many in the medical community began to recognize the earlier work of Semmelweis. And this is something that's always true about new ideas. There's the person who has the idea, and they are either accepted or rejected. But it's only when a second influential person signs on, that's when everyone starts going, oh, maybe person number one had something. And so it's this Dr. Lister and his group of people signing in to Semmelweis's ideas that suddenly made it acceptable to everybody else.
好，所以很多 idea 都是这样子，后来就要有其他的名人出来支持或者出来讲点话，这样大家才会觉得这个 idea 可能是很值得接受的。好，所以这里看到 not long after 不久之后呢，或者之后不久呢， many 就是 many people 很多人在哪里的很多人呢？是 in the medical community 啊，在医学界的很多人 community 在这里就中文讲什么什么界啊，医学界什么牙医界等等那个界的意思。所以很多人在医学界的很多在医学界的人呢 began to 开始 recognize 开始认可开始承认它是对的recognize 什么东西呢？ the earlier work of Semmelweis 所以对于他一开始早先的那个他所做的事情，大家开始觉得他其实做的是对的。
More than a century after Semmelweis's ideas were rejected, the Medical University of Budapest changed its name to Semmelweis University in honor of his commitment to improving health care by way of cleanliness. So more than 100 years after they first were like, no, we don't like you, they're like, oh, yep, we're going to name our university after you because, yep, you really changed everything about medical care.
Yeah, 所以在他的想法遭到拒绝100多年之后呢，布达佩斯医学大学就更名为塞麦尔维斯大学那 in honor of 就是用来纪念或者用来表彰 his commitment 他的奉献，表彰他对什么的奉献呢？ his commitment to improving 改善 healthcare 医疗保健 by way of 透过什么的方式改善医疗保健呢？透过 cleanliness 透过清洁的方式来改善医疗保健在这方面他的奉献，为了表达大家对他的感谢，就把医学院的名字改名为他的名字。
Okay, now we have some questions here for you on the article. And number one is, where would this passage most likely be found?
本文最可能在哪里找到呢？
The answer is B.
答案是 B.
In a journal on the history of medicine.
在医学史的期刊上。
Number two, what was the initial result of Dr. Semmelweis's practice?
那这位医生他的做法最初的结果是什么呢？
The answer is C. Fewer women died after childbirth.
答案是 C 这个生产后死亡的妇女人数变少了。
And number three, which of the following orders is correct about the history of handwashing theory?
关于洗手理论的历史，以下哪一个程序是正确的？
The answer is D, application, rejection, publication, recognition.
答案是 D 啊，应用，然后被拒绝，所以他去出版，最后得到认可。
And number 4, what is the purpose of the final paragraph?
最后一段的主旨是什么呢？
The answer is C, to celebrate Dr. Semmelweis's eventual recognition.
好，答案是 C， 庆祝塞麦尔维斯医师最后终于获得认可。
Okay, that's all we have for you today, but please join us again tomorrow for more IVR.